Shout at me again, and this ends. The velvet room went dead silent. You could hear ice settling in whiskey glasses. On one side, Leonard Sandberg, a man who controlled half the city's underground, a man who could make entire families disappear with a phone call. On the other, Delia, a waitress with $23 in her bank account and a loan shark waiting outside her apartment. Everyone expected her to be dragged out. Everyone expected to never see her again. But what Leonard did next didn't just shock his crew. It changed the entire power structure of the criminal underworld, and the deal he was about to offer her, no one saw it coming. This is the story of the waitress who refused to bow. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The city didn't sleep. It just pretended to, waiting for something bloody to happen. For Delia Pickett, the Thursday night shift at the Velvet Room felt less like work and more like walking a tightrope over broken glass. She stood behind the polished mahogany bar, wiping down champagne flutes that cost more than her monthly rent, trying to ignore the vibration in her apron pocket. She didn't need to check her phone to know who it was. Tommy, the collector, Russo, or the electric company, or the hospital billing department demanding payment for her mother's final weeks. It was the unholy trinity of her existence. Debt, fear, and the relentless hunger of people who wanted money she didn't have. Delia, Booth 7 needs another bottle of the Cristal, and Booth 3 is asking if we have cigars from Cuba or just the Dominican knockoffs. Carlo, the floor manager, hissed as he rushed past her, his face glistening with nervous sweat. Carlo was terrified of the clientele, and with good reason. The Velvet Room wasn't just a lounge. It was a throne room for the city's most dangerous men. Politicians sat next to drug lords. Judges drank alongside hitmen. Everyone pretended the rules applied. I got it, Delia said, forcing her face into something that resembled a smile. She moved through the dim red lighting, past leather booths where conversations stopped the second she approached. The smell of expensive cologne and cigar smoke clung to everything. The clink of crystal against wood was the soundtrack of her survival for the past 2 years. Delia was 28 now. According to the plan she'd written in her nursing school orientation packet, she should have been working in pediatrics, wearing scrubs with cartoon characters, saving kids' lives. Instead, she was carrying overpriced alcohol to men who destroyed lives for sport and fighting the urge to scream every single shift. She dropped out when her mother got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The treatment swallowed her tuition money, then her savings, then any hope of a future that didn't involve tips and terror. Her mother passed 6 months ago, leaving Delia with a 16-year-old brother to raise and a debt to Tommy Russo that grew interest like a tumor. She approached booth 7 with practiced efficiency. Pour, smile, nod, apologize for existing, repeat. Excuse me, sweetheart. Delia turned to booth 3. A man with gold rings on every finger was holding up an empty glass, ice rattling against the sides. This scotch tastes watered down. I pay for premium, I expect premium. I apologize, sir. Delia lied smoothly. Let me get you a fresh pour from a new bottle. As she headed back to the bar, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a change in air pressure, like right before a thunderstorm. The conversations at the booths near the entrance died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Phones were subtly pocketed. The front door swung open, and 2 men in black suits entered first, scanning the room with the cold efficiency of wolves checking for threats. Security. Then he walked in. Leonard Sandberg. You didn't need to read the crime reports to know who Leonard Sandberg was. At 35, he ran the most powerful organized crime family on the East Coast. If you needed something moved, someone found, or a problem permanently solved, Leonard's network handled it. He owned judges, cops, and half the city council. He was handsome in a dangerous way. Sharp cheekbones, slicked back dark hair, and eyes like polished steel that seemed to calculate exactly how much pain you could endure before you broke. He didn't wait to be greeted. He walked straight to the VIP booth at the back, the one with the view of the entire room, which was currently occupied by 2 young guys in expensive suits trying to look important. Carlo practically tripped over his own feet rushing toward them. Mr. Sandberg, we weren't expecting you tonight. What an honor. Truly. Carlo was sweating through his shirt now. He glanced at the two men in the booth, then back at Leonard. The men, realizing whose table they were sitting at, grabbed their drinks and scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Leonard didn't acknowledge them. He didn't acknowledge Carlo. He just sat down, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, and placed his phone on the table. Bourbon. Neat. Top shelf. And get me Vincent. Tell him I'm waiting, Leonard said. His voice was quiet, smooth, and absolutely devoid of anything resembling kindness. Carlo turned pale. Delia, he whispered urgently, grabbing her elbow as she passed. Booth 12, Mr. Sandberg. If you screw this up, you're done here. And I mean done. Delia looked at the booth. She looked at the man who hadn't even glanced in her direction. She felt that familiar knot of exhaustion and rage tightening in her chest, but she nodded. I got it, Carlo. She walked to the bar. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from running on 4 hours of sleep and a granola bar she'd stolen from the break room. She poured the bourbon carefully, making sure the glass was spotless, the pour exact. She approached booth 12. Good evening, Mr. Sandberg, she said, setting the glass down on a leather coaster. He didn't look up. He didn't respond. He just tapped something on his phone screen, his tattooed knuckles catching the low amber light. Delia paused. She was used to being invisible. Waitresses were ghosts to men like this. But this felt different. It was a deliberate erasure. She took a breath and stepped back. If you need anything else, the sound of glass slamming against wood cut her off. This tastes like paint thinner. Delia froze. She turned back. He was finally looking at her. His eyes were cold, gray, empty. I just poured that from a $400 bottle, sir, Delia said, keeping her voice steady. I didn't ask for a price report, Leonard snapped. I said it tastes like garbage. Take it back. Bring me something that doesn't insult my palate. And if the next one's just as bad, I'll buy this place just so I can fire you in person. The room went silent. Every conversation stopped. People were staring. Delia felt heat flood her face. It wasn't the insult. She'd been insulted by worse men. It was the cruelty in his voice, the way he looked at her like she was dirt on his shoe that he couldn't be bothered to scrape off. She picked up the glass. I apologize, mister. Don't apologize. Just do your job correctly for once. And that's when something inside her snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the debt. Maybe it was knowing that her brother Marcus was at home right now doing homework alone because she couldn't afford to quit this nightmare. Maybe it was just the fact that she was tired of being treated like she didn't matter. Delia set the glass back down on the table. Hard. Shout at me again, she said quietly, her voice steady as iron. And this ends. The velvet room went dead silent. Leonard Sandberg stared at her. His security tensed. Carlo looked like he was about to pass out. And Delia Pickett, a waitress with $23 to her name and nothing left to lose, stared right back. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is respect yourself in a room full of people who don't. Power doesn't always come from money or muscle. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be small. What happens next will blow your mind. Don't go anywhere. The apartment was supposed to be temporary. That's what Delia told herself 2 years ago when she signed the lease on the 4th-floor walk-up in Riverside. The kind of neighborhood where gunshots were just background noise, and the corner store had bulletproof glass at the counter. Temporary, just until she got back on her feet. Just until Marcus graduated high school. Just until the debt stopped growing. But debt doesn't stop growing. It metastasizes. She climbed the stairs slowly, her legs aching from the double shift. It was past midnight, and the hallway smelled like weed and old cooking grease. Someone's TV was blaring through thin walls. She fumbled with her keys, the metal cold against her fingers, and pushed open the door. Marcus was asleep on the couch, calculus textbook open on his chest, pencil still in his hand. The kid was 16 but looked older, all sharp angles and suspicious eyes. He'd learned early that the world didn't give you anything for free. Delia's heart twisted looking at him. He deserved better than this. Better than her scrambling to keep the lights on. Better than eating ramen 4 nights a week. She pulled a blanket over him and grabbed her phone from her apron pocket. 3 missed calls from Tommy Russo's crew. 2 text messages. 1 voicemail she didn't need to listen to because she already knew what it said. You're 2 weeks late, Delia. Interest is compounding. We need to talk. She opened her banking app, already knowing what she'd see. Account balance, $23.47. Rent was due in 5 days, $850. The electric bill was overdue. Another $120. Marcus needed new shoes because his current ones had holes in the soles he tried to hide from her. And Tommy Russo wanted $200 a week, every week, until the $8,000 principal was paid off. Principal that had started at $3,000 18 months ago, when she'd needed to pay for her mother's last round of chemo that insurance wouldn't cover. The math didn't work. It never worked. Delia sat at their tiny kitchen table, the one that wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others, and put her head in her hands. She thought about her mother in those final weeks, the way the hospital room smelled like disinfectant trying to mask decay, the way her mother had gripped her hand and whispered, "Take care of Marcus. Promise me. Don't let him end up in the streets." Delia had promised, and she'd kept that promise, but it was killing her inch by inch. She'd withdrawn from nursing school 3 weeks into her mother's diagnosis. The tuition refund had covered exactly one round of treatment. Her savings evaporated next. Then she'd maxed out her credit cards. When those ran dry and the medical bills kept coming like a biblical plague, she'd made the mistake of asking Tommy Russo for help. Everyone in Riverside knew Tommy. He wasn't Mafia, not officially, but he operated in the same ecosystem. He lent money to desperate people and collected with interest that would make payday lenders blush. She should have known better. But desperation makes you stupid. Now Marcus was doing well in school, honor roll even, talking about college scholarships and engineering programs. And Delia was working herself to death at the Velvet Room, smiling at mobsters and criminals, carrying their drinks, swallowing their insults, because the tips were the only thing keeping them afloat. She checked her phone again. Another text from an unknown number. "Tommy's running out of patience. You know what happens when he runs out of patience." Yeah, she knew. She'd seen what happened to people who couldn't pay. Broken fingers were the warning. Disappearances were the final notice. Delia looked at Marcus sleeping on the couch, his face peaceful in a way it never was when he was awake. She thought about the nursing degree she'd never finish, the future she'd traded for his survival, the crushing weight of being 28 years old and feeling like she was already drowning with no shore in sight. She deleted the text and turned off her phone. Tomorrow she'd figure it out. Tomorrow she'd find the money somehow. Tomorrow she'd keep the lights on and Tommy Russo off their doorstep for one more week. Tonight, she just needed to sleep. Delia was fired before she even made it to the employee exit. Carlo caught her in the back hallway, his face red, his hands shaking. "You're done. Clean out your locker. Don't come back. I can't have someone who talks to clients like that, especially not him. Do you have any idea what you've done?" She did have an idea. She'd just committed career suicide in front of the most dangerous man in the city. But the weird thing was, she didn't regret it. For the first time in 2 years, she'd felt like a human being instead of a piece of furniture. The feeling lasted exactly as long as it took her to reach the street. The night air was cold, biting through her thin jacket. She stood on the sidewalk, watching taxis pass, and felt the weight of reality crushing down on her chest. No job, no prospects, $23 in her account, Tommy Russo's deadline looming, Marcus at home with holes in his shoes. She'd just destroyed the only thing keeping them afloat because she couldn't keep her mouth shut for 5 more seconds. Delia started walking. She didn't have money for a taxi, and the bus didn't run this late. It was a 40-minute walk home through neighborhoods that got progressively worse. She didn't care. Let something happen. At this point, it might be a relief. She made it 3 blocks before the black Mercedes pulled up beside her. The window rolled down smoothly, and there he was. Leonard Sandberg, sitting in the back seat like he owned the entire city, which technically he did. His security guy was driving. Another one sat in the passenger seat, watching her with flat, emotionless eyes. "Get in," Leonard said. "Not a request, a command." Delia stopped walking. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like concrete. "I'd rather walk." "I wasn't asking." His voice was calm, almost bored. "Get in the car, Delia. We need to talk." The fact that he knew her name sent ice down her spine. She glanced at the security guy in the passenger seat. His hand rested casually near his waistband. She thought about Marcus waking up tomorrow and finding out his sister had vanished. She got in the car. The door closed with an expensive, final-sounding click. The interior smelled like leather and something else, something sharp and masculine. Leonard was watching her with those cold, gray eyes, and up close she could see the details. The faint scar above his left eyebrow, the tattoos creeping up from his collar. The way he held himself like violence was always an option. "You got me fired," Delia said, because if she was going to die tonight, she might as well go down swinging. "I got you freed," Leonard corrected. That job was beneath you. That job was feeding my brother. Your brother Marcus, 16, junior at Riverside High, 3.8 gigapascals, applied for 3 scholarship programs. Leonard tilted his head slightly. You owe Tommy Russo $8,000 at 15% weekly interest. You're 2 weeks behind. Your rent is due in 5 days. You have $23 in your checking account and maxed out credit cards. Should I continue? Delia's blood ran cold. How do you... I know everything about everyone who interests me. And you, Delia Pickett, interest me very much. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. You did something tonight that no one has done in 5 years. You looked me in the eye and told me no. In front of my crew. In front of people who've seen men killed for less. So you're here to finish the job? Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. I'm here to offer you a job. A real one. Delia laughed, sharp and bitter. What, you need someone to insult you professionally now? I need a fiancé. He said it like he was ordering takeout. For 6 weeks, you'll live in my penthouse, attend events with me, convince certain people that I'm going legitimate, settling down, becoming a family man. In return, I'll pay you $150,000, cash. Plus I'll erase your debt to Tommy and cover your brother's college tuition when the time comes. Delia stared at him. That's insane. That's business. Leonard pulled out his phone, tapped something, and turned the screen toward her. It was a bank transfer screen with her name on it, and a number that made her dizzy. $150,000. I can send this right now. Or, I can drop you off at your apartment, and you can go back to dodging Tommy's collectors and watching your brother's future disappear. Why me? Because you're fearless when you should be terrified. Because you can sell a lie better than anyone I've met. And because after tonight, everyone in my world knows your face. They'll believe you tamed me. His eyes darkened. 6 weeks. That's all I need. Delia looked at the phone screen. She thought about Marcus, about nursing school, about not being afraid every single day. She thought about what her mother would say. What's the catch? Leonard smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. The people I'm deceiving? If they find out you're fake, they'll kill you. Slowly. The car went silent except for the hum of the engine. So, Leonard said quietly, do we have a deal? The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Meridian Tower, 43 stories above the city where laws seemed like suggestions. Delia stood in the marble foyer, still wearing her waitress uniform, feeling like she'd stepped into a movie about people whose problems she couldn't comprehend. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the glittering skyline. Everything was sharp angles and expensive surfaces, the kind of place where you were afraid to touch anything because it probably cost more than your life. Your room is down the hall, second door on the left, Leonard said, shrugging off his suit jacket. One of his security guys took it without a word. Get some sleep. Your transformation starts at 6 a.m. Transformation, Delia repeated. You make it sound like I'm a project. You are. He poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. Right now, you're a waitress from Riverside who smells like bar smoke and fear. In 2 weeks, you need to be someone who belongs on my arm at a governor's fundraiser. That's not going to happen by accident. She wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. She didn't belong here, not even close. 6 a.m. came like a violent alarm clock. A woman in her 50s with severe cheekbones and an Italian accent appeared at Delia's door with coffee and a look that suggested failure wasn't an option. I'm Sophia. I'll be handling your wardrobe and presentation. We have much work to do. She looked Delia up and down with the clinical assessment of a surgeon examining a patient. Much work. The next 3 days were a blur of humiliation and exhaustion. Sophia brought in racks of designer clothes, things with labels Delia had only seen in magazines that celebrities wore to award shows. She was measured, critiqued, and dressed like a doll. The clothes fit perfectly because they were tailored on-site by a nervous man who spoke only in Italian and kept apologizing for the pins. Posture, Sophia snapped during hour 2 of what she called deportment training. You walk like you're carrying trays, chin up, shoulders back. You're not serving anyone anymore. You're the woman who brought Leonard Sandberg to his knees. I didn't bring anyone to their knees, Delia muttered. The story says you did. The story is all that matters. A man named Victor handled what he called tactical awareness, which was apparently code for how not to get killed at Mafia functions. He was former military, built like a concrete wall, with scars on his knuckles and a matter-of-fact way of discussing violence. At any event, you identify exits first. Always keep Sandberg in your peripheral vision. Never accept drinks from anyone but the servers, and even then, watch them pour it. He placed a small device in her hand, a sleek panic button disguised as a high-end lipstick case. Press the top twice if you're in danger. Security will reach you in under 90 seconds. And if 90 seconds is too long? Victor pulled out a compact pistol, checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, and handed it to her. Then you use this. Safety here. Aim center mass. Pull twice. Delia stared at the gun. The weight of it felt wrong in her hand, like holding something that belonged in a different universe. I've never shot a gun in my life. You will by tomorrow. The shooting range was in the basement, soundproofed and clinical. Victor taught her the basics with the patience of someone who'd trained people who actually needed these skills to survive. The first shot kicked harder than she expected, and she missed the target completely. By the 100th shot, her hands were steady, and the tight grouping on the paper silhouette surprised her more than it surprised Victor. "You're a natural," he said, which didn't feel like a compliment. Leonard appeared on day 4 while Sophia was teaching Delia the difference between small talk and intelligence gathering. "How's my investment?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe with that same calculating look he always wore. "Your investment is exhausted, and wondering why she needs to know which fork to use when everyone at these events probably has bodies buried somewhere." "Because the fork matters," Leonard said. "Every detail matters. These people read weakness like sharks read blood in the water. One wrong move, one hesitation, and they'll know you're not who you say you are." Sophia held up a midnight blue evening gown, something that looked like it cost more than Delia's entire year of rent. "Try this." Delia disappeared into the bathroom and emerged 5 minutes later feeling like an imposter in someone else's skin. The dress fit like it was designed specifically for her body, which it had been. She caught her reflection in the full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. Leonard's expression shifted slightly, something flickering in those cold eyes. "Perfect. Now you look like you could ruin me. Isn't that the opposite of what you're paying me for?" "No," he said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm paying you for. They need to believe you're the one thing in this world I can't control." The conversation happened on day 5, in Leonard's office at 2 in the morning when the city below looked like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Delia couldn't sleep, too wired from learning how to identify poisoned drinks and which crime families controlled which territories. She'd wandered out to the living room in borrowed silk pajamas and found Leonard at his desk, surrounded by files and photographs, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. "Can't sleep either?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Actually tired, not just dangerous. "Come in. We need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. She sat in the leather chair across from his desk, and he slid a photograph toward her. It showed a man in his 60s, distinguished-looking, with the same sharp cheekbones as Leonard, and eyes that held the same cold intelligence. "My father, Robert Sandberg. He built everything I control now from absolutely nothing." Leonard's voice was flat, controlled. 3 years ago, someone put 2 bullets in his head while he ate dinner at his favorite restaurant. Professional hit. Clean. The shooter was never found. Delia looked at the photograph, then at Leonard. "I'm sorry. Don't be. He was a criminal. He knew the risks." Leonard pulled out another photograph, this one showing a group of men in expensive suits standing around a conference table. But he was also careful. Paranoid, even. Someone close to him gave up his location, his schedule, his security detail, someone he trusted. "And you never found out who?" "I found out 3 weeks ago." Leonard tapped one of the faces in the photograph. A handsome man with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile. "Vincent Corso. My underboss. My father's best friend since they were kids running numbers in Brooklyn. The man who held me when I was born." The way he said it, so empty of emotion, made it worse somehow. Delia leaned forward. "You're sure?" "I have intercepted communications between Vincent and the Bratva, the Russian syndicate that's been trying to move into our territory for 5 years. He's been feeding them information, shipping routes, safe houses, names of our people in witness protection." Leonard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He's the reason my father died, and he's planning to finish what he started. He's planning to kill you. He's planning to hand over my entire operation to the Bratva in exchange for a percentage and safe passage to somewhere without extradition. The deal closes in 6 weeks. Leonard met her eyes. Which is why I need everyone, including Vincent, to believe I'm distracted. Soft. Going legitimate because I fell in love with some waitress who civilized me. The pieces clicked together in Delia's mind like a gun being assembled. The sudden job offer. The transformation. The very public engagement he had planned. She felt cold spreading through her chest. I'm bait. You're a distraction, Leonard corrected, but it amounted to the same thing. Vincent needs to believe I'm not watching him, that I'm too busy playing house to notice what's happening in my own organization. He needs to underestimate me. And when he realizes you're setting him up, when the Bratva figures out your fiancé is fake, Delia's voice rose. You said they'd kill me slowly. You didn't mention that was basically guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. It's a possibility. Leonard poured himself another drink. This one he actually took a sip from. I have 30 men protecting you at all times. Vincent won't move until he's sure. And by then I'll have everything I need to bury him. You could have told me this before I signed up. Would you have said yes? Delia thought about the $150,000 already sitting in her account, about Marcus's tuition fund, about Tommy Russo's debt that had disappeared like it never existed, about the nursing school applications Leonard's people were already filling out in her name. No, she admitted. Exactly. Leonard stood, walking to the window with his drink. His reflection in the glass looked like a ghost. My father used to say that in this life, everyone's either a predator or prey. There's no middle ground. You spend your whole existence trying to make sure you're the one doing the hunting. Is that what I am to you? Prey? He turned to face her, and something in his expression shifted. No, you're the person who told me to stop shouting. You're the only one in 3 years who's looked at me like I'm still human. He paused. But I need you to understand what you're in now. Vincent Corso is a predator. The Bratva are predators, and they're both circling. If they sense weakness, if they think for 1 second that you matter to me beyond this arrangement, they'll use you to get to me. So I can't actually matter. No, Leonard said quietly. You can't. But the way he said it made Delia wonder if that ship had already sailed. The dinner was held at Leonard's estate outside the city, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been designed to intimidate visiting diplomats or hide bodies in the basement. Probably both. Delia stood in front of the mirror in her assigned room, adjusting the emerald green dress Sophia had selected, and tried to remember everything Victor had taught her about reading a room for threats. Exits first. Leonard in peripheral. Never accept drinks from strangers, trust no one. The words looped in her head like a prayer. Leonard appeared in the doorway, immaculate in a black suit that probably cost more than a decent used car. He looked her over with that clinical assessment she'd come to recognize, but something else flickered in his eyes. Appreciation, maybe. Or concern. They're going to test you tonight, he said. Vincent will be watching everything. How you hold your fork, how you respond to insults, whether you flinch when they talk about things that would make normal people sick. I waitressed at the Velvet Room for 2 years. I've heard worse than whatever they'll say. No, Leonard said quietly. You haven't. The dining room could have seated 30. But tonight there were only 8 place settings at the long mahogany table. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across faces that belonged in a police lineup. These were Leonard's inner circle, the men who ran his empire's day-to-day operations, and every single one of them looked at Delia like she was a puzzle they couldn't wait to solve or destroy. Vincent Corso sat at Leonard's right hand, exactly where a trusted underboss should sit. He was handsome in that aging movie star way, silver hair perfectly styled, expensive watch catching the light. When he smiled at Delia, it looked genuine. That's what made him terrifying. So this is the famous waitress, Vincent said, standing to pull out her chair with old-world courtesy. The woman who tamed the untamable Leonard Sandberg. I had to see it to believe it. Believe it, Leonard said, his hand settling possessively on the small of Delia's back as he guided her to her seat. The others introduced themselves in a blur of names and faces. Carlo De Luca, the numbers guy with dead eyes. Marcus Volkov, the enforcer with scarred knuckles and a thick Russian accent. Anthony Greco, young and ambitious, and watching her like a cat watches a mouse. Sophia was there too, dressed like she belonged at the opera, offering Delia an encouraging nod. The first course arrived on bone china plates, some kind of seafood that Delia couldn't identify. She picked up the correct fork, thank you, Sophia, and took a small bite while conversation flowed around her like a river of coded language and inside jokes. I heard you stood up to Leonard in front of half the Velvet Room, Carlo said, his tone conversational but his eyes sharp. That takes either courage or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing, Delia replied, a few chuckles around the table. She caught Leonard's almost imperceptible nod. Good answer. Tell me, Delia, Vincent said, pouring wine into her glass from a bottle that probably cost more than her childhood home. What's a smart girl like you doing with a man like our Leonard? Surely you know what he is, what we all are. The table went quiet. This was the test. Everyone leaning in, waiting to see if she'd flinch or lie or crack under the weight of the truth. I know exactly what he is, Delia said, meeting Vincent's eyes. The question is whether any of you know what I am. Vincent's smile widened. Enlighten us. I'm the woman who's not afraid of him. That makes me either the smartest person at this table or the most dangerous. She lifted her wine glass. You can decide which. She was about to take a sip when she noticed it. A thin, oily film on the surface of the wine, catching the light at the wrong angle. Her hand froze halfway to her lips. Victor's training kicked in like muscle memory. She set the glass down carefully, her heart hammering but her face perfectly calm. Actually, I prefer red, she said smoothly. White gives me headaches. Leonard's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Not hard, but firm. He looked at the wine glass, then at Vincent, then slowly around the table. When his eyes landed on Anthony Greco, the young, ambitious one, something deadly flickered across his face. Anthony had gone pale, a thin sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead. Anthony, Leonard said, his voice soft as silk over razors, did you pour Delia's wine? I was just trying to answer the question. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Anthony looked desperately at Vincent, but the older man's face had gone carefully neutral, offering no help. It was a test, Anthony stammered. Vincent said we needed to know if she was... He didn't finish the sentence. Leonard was across the table before anyone could move, his hand around Anthony's throat, slamming him back against his chair. You poisoned my fiancée at my table? Not poison, Anthony choked out. Just enough to make her sick, to see if she'd notice, if she was really... Vincent stood smoothly, his voice calm. Leonard, he's young, overzealous. Let him breathe. Leonard released Anthony, who collapsed, gasping into his chair. But Leonard's eyes were on Vincent now, and Delia saw something pass between them. A challenge, an acknowledgement. Get out, Leonard said to Anthony. You're done. As Anthony scrambled from the room, Leonard returned to his seat beside Delia, his hand finding hers under the table. His fingers were still trembling with rage. Vincent raised his own glass. To Delia, he said, and his smile was sharp as broken glass. Welcome to the family. The explosion happened 3 days after the dinner, on a Tuesday morning that had started ordinary enough to feel dangerous in retrospect. Delia was learning that, in Leonard's world, ordinary was when you should be most afraid. They were leaving the penthouse for a charity luncheon, some political fundraiser where Leonard needed to be seen playing the reformed businessman. Delia wore a cream-colored suit that Sophia had selected, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older, more established. She'd almost started to believe her own reflection. Leonard's driver brought the car around to the private garage entrance, a black Escalade with bulletproof glass and reinforced panels. Victor did his usual security sweep, checking underneath with a mirror on a pole, opening the hood, scanning for irregularities. He gave the all-clear signal. After you, Leonard said, his hand on her lower back, guiding her toward the vehicle. That's when Delia's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Can you call me? Need to talk about the college visit thing. She stopped walking, pulling out her phone to respond. Give me 2 seconds. My brother. Leonard nodded, continuing toward the car while she typed out a quick reply. Victor was holding the rear door open. Leonard was 3 steps from the vehicle when Victor's face changed, his eyes going wide with recognition and horror. Don't. The word was drowned out by the sound of the world ending. The explosion lifted the Escalade 5 feet off the ground and turned it into a fireball of twisted metal and shattered glass. The shockwave hit Delia like a physical wall, throwing her backward into Leonard, both of them crashing to the concrete. Heat washed over them, singing the air, and debris rained down in a metallic hailstorm. Delia's ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that blocked out everything else. She couldn't hear, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. Strong hands gripped her shoulders. Leonard's face appeared above hers, his mouth moving, shouting something she couldn't make out. Then the training kicked in, Victor's voice in her head. If there's an explosion, there's usually a follow-up. Move. Never stay in the kill zone. She let Leonard pull her to her feet. Her legs didn't want to cooperate, but adrenaline and survival instinct overrode the shock. They ran toward the stairwell exit, away from the burning wreckage where Victor had been standing seconds ago. Leonard practically carried her down 3 flights of stairs to a sub-level garage she didn't know existed. A nondescript gray sedan was waiting, engine already running. Leonard shoved her into the passenger seat and floored it before her door was fully closed. They burst out of a service exit onto a side street, tires screaming against asphalt. "Victor," Delia managed to say, her voice sounding strange and distant through the ringing in her ears. "Dead." Leonard's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Blood was running down the side of his face from a cut above his ear. "If you hadn't stopped to text your brother, you'd be dead too." The reality of it hit her like a second explosion. She'd been 3 steps from that car, 3 steps from being vaporized. She started shaking, her whole body vibrating with delayed terror. "Breathe," Leonard commanded, weaving through traffic at speeds that would have terrified her if she wasn't already drowning in fear. Deep breaths. "Stay with me." "Who?" "The Bratva." "Vincent's moving faster than I anticipated. He ran a red light, horns blaring around them. He knows I'm onto him, so he's escalating." They drove for 2 hours into the mountains, taking side roads and doubling back to lose anyone following. Delia watched the city disappear in the rearview mirror, replaced by dense forest and winding roads that climbed into elevation where the air grew thin and cold. The safe house was more like a fortress disguised as a cabin, all reinforced walls and security cameras hidden in the trees. Leonard pulled into a concealed garage that closed behind them like a mouth swallowing them whole. Inside, the place was sparse but functional. Generator power, satellite internet, enough weapons in a locked cabinet to outfit a small militia. Leonard finally stopped moving, leaning against the kitchen counter with his head in his hands. "Victor had 3 kids," he said quietly. "A wife, grandkids on the way." Delia's hands were still shaking. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the phantom heat of the explosion on her skin. "This is my fault. If I'd just gotten in the car, then we'd both be dead, and Vincent would be toasting his success right now." Leonard looked up, his eyes harder than she'd ever seen them. "This isn't your fault. This is what happens in my world. People die, usually the wrong people. I want to go home. I want to see Marcus." "You can't." Leonard's voice was firm but not unkind. "The second you show your face in the city, you're a target. Vincent will send everything he has at you to get to me. Your brother's safer if you stay dead for now." "Stay dead? As far as anyone knows, you were in that car. Let them think it worked." He pulled out a burner phone and tossed it to her. "Call your brother. Tell him you're on a trip with me. Wedding planning, whatever, but you can't tell him the truth." Delia caught the phone, staring at it like it might explode too. Everything in her life had become a lie wrapped in another lie, and somewhere underneath all of it was a version of herself who just wanted to pay rent and keep her brother safe. "How long do we stay here?" Leonard's jaw tightened. "Until I figure out how to kill Vincent Corso before he kills us." They lasted 4 days in the mountains before Vincent found them. Delia should have known something was wrong when Leonard's phone rang at 3 in the morning. Nobody calls with good news at 3 a.m. She was in the living room, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like concrete. Leonard appeared from his bedroom, phone pressed to his ear, his face unreadable in the dim light. "Understood," he said, then ended the call. "What is it?" "Carlo says he has proof. Documents linking Vincent to the Bratva, offshore accounts, everything." Leonard was already moving, grabbing his jacket. "He's bringing them here. Wants to meet in person because he doesn't trust electronic communication." Something about it felt wrong to Delia, like a note played off-key in a familiar song. Why would Carlo come all the way out here? Why not meet somewhere in the city? Because Vincent has eyes everywhere in the city. Carlo's paranoid, always has been. Leonard checked the pistol he kept in his waistband. "It's fine. He knows the location. I gave it to him 3 years ago as emergency protocol." "You gave Vincent this location too?" Leonard froze, his hand still on the gun. Their eyes met across the room, and she watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd given the address to his inner circle as a failsafe, which meant Vincent had known where they were this entire time. The sound of tires on gravel came 30 seconds later. Leonard killed the lights and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see outside. A black SUV sat in the driveway, headlights still on, engine running. The driver's door opened and Vincent Corso stepped out, looking exactly like what he was, a well-dressed predator who'd finally cornered his prey. Son of a bitch, Leonard whispered. Vincent wasn't alone. 4 men emerged from the vehicle, all carrying weapons they weren't bothering to hide. They fanned out with military precision, covering exits and angles. Professional. Prepared. Back door, Leonard said, already moving. There's a trail through the woods. The back door exploded inward before they reached it, kicked open by a man the size of a refrigerator. Marcus Volkov, the Russian enforcer from the dinner. He had a shotgun pointed directly at them, and his smile showed too many teeth. Going somewhere? Leonard's hand went to his gun, but Volkov shook his head slowly. Don't. I will paint these nice walls with your girlfriend before you clear leather. The front door opened, and Vincent walked in like he owned the place. Maybe he thought he did now. He looked around the cabin with the casual interest of someone evaluating real estate. Then his eyes settled on Leonard with something that might have been sadness if it wasn't so hollow. You were always too smart for your own good, Vincent said. Just like your father. You killed him. Leonard's voice was cold, controlled, but Delia could see the rage trembling underneath like an earthquake waiting to break the surface. Your best friend. The man who trusted you with everything. Robert trusted everyone. That was his weakness. Vincent poured himself a drink from the bourbon bottle on the counter, completely at ease. He thought loyalty mattered more than survival. He was wrong. So, you sold him to the Bratva for what? Money? Power? Evolution? Vincent took a sip, savoring it. Your father built an empire on old rules, old ways. The Bratva offered something better, a global network, unlimited resources, territories your father never dreamed of touching. He wouldn't adapt, so he had to be removed. Delia felt Leonard tense beside her, his whole body coiled like a spring about to snap. She touched his arm gently, a reminder that Volkov still had the shotgun pointed at her chest. And now you're removing me, Leonard said. Now I'm finishing what I started. Vincent set down his glass. The Bratva wants your infrastructure, your connections, your offshore accounts. In exchange, I get to run the American operations with their backing. It's just business, Leonard. Nothing personal. You murdered my father. You tried to kill me and Delia. That sounds pretty fucking personal. Vincent shrugged. Your father made it personal when he refused to see the future. You made it personal when you started digging into finances you should have left alone. He gestured to Volkov. Secure them. We're taking them back to the city. Why not just kill us here? Delia asked. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Vincent smiled at her, and it was worse than any threat. Because the Bratva wants a public execution. They want every crime family on the East Coast to watch Leonard Sandberg die, to understand what happens when you resist their expansion. And you, my dear, you're the opening act. The waitress who thought she could play in our world. She's not part of this, Leonard said. Let her go. She became part of this the second you put a ring on her finger, real or fake. Vincent nodded to Volkov. Tie them up, and if either of them tries anything, shoot the girl first. Make him watch. As Volkov moved toward them with zip ties, Delia caught Leonard's eye. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent message she understood completely. This wasn't over. Not yet. But they needed to survive the next 5 minutes to have any chance at all. They brought them back to the Velvet Room, just before midnight, when the lounge was packed with the city's elite and criminal class. All of them drinking expensive liquor and pretending they weren't rubbing shoulders with murderers. Vincent had orchestrated it perfectly, a public execution disguised as theater, witnessed by everyone who mattered. Delia and Leonard were dragged through the kitchen entrance, hands zip-tied behind their backs, Volkov's gun pressed against Leonard's spine. The kitchen staff scattered like roaches, nobody willing to see what they knew they couldn't unsee. Carlo was already there, standing beside Vincent with the guilty posture of a man who'd sold his soul and was trying to convince himself it was worth the price. The VIP room, Vincent instructed. We'll do it there. Private, but visible enough that word spreads within the hour. The VIP room was in the back of the Velvet Room, past the main lounge, accessible only through a hallway lined with burgundy velvet and false promises. Delia had worked here for 2 years. She knew every inch of this place, every corner, every shortcut the staff used to avoid customers, including the service passages that ran behind the walls like veins. Vincent shoved Leonard into a leather chair, and Volkov did the same to Delia. 4 armed men positioned themselves at the exits. Vincent pulled out a knife, the blade catching the low amber lighting, and Delia's heart hammered against her ribs. I want you to know, Vincent said to Leonard, that I genuinely did love your father. But love doesn't pay for expansion into European markets. Love doesn't secure shipping lanes through the Mediterranean. Love didn't stop you from putting bullets in his head, Leonard said. No, it didn't. Vincent turned the knife in his hand. The Bratva's representative will be here in 10 minutes to witness this. After you're dead, I take over operations with their full backing. Clean transition. Everyone wins. Except the people you murdered. Collateral damage. Vincent looked at Delia. Starting with your little waitress. I think we'll kill her first. Make you watch. Poetic, don't you think? It all started in this lounge with her standing up to you. It ends the same way, with her dying because of you. He moved toward Delia, and she felt her pulse spike into overdrive, but she wasn't the terrified waitress anymore. She'd spent weeks training with Victor, learning to read situations, to wait for the opening, and she knew something Vincent didn't. Behind the wall panel to her right, there was a service passage that led to the kitchen. She'd used it 100 times to avoid drunk customers and handsy businessmen. Vincent, Carlo said nervously from the doorway. The Bratva rep is pulling up. Perfect timing. Vincent grabbed Delia's hair, yanking her head back to expose her throat. The knife gleamed. Any last words? Yeah, Delia said. I know this building better than you do. She threw her weight sideways, the chair tipping over, and she rolled hard into the wall panel. It gave way with a crack. The lock was flimsy, designed to be opened from either side for staff access, and suddenly she was tumbling into darkness, the narrow service corridor swallowing her. Get her! Vincent's voice, furious and shocked. But Delia was already moving. Her hands were still zip-tied, but her legs worked fine, and she knew these passages by muscle memory. Left at the junction, straight past the wine storage, right toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard boots pounding, flashlights cutting through the darkness, Volkov's voice shouting in Russian. She burst through the kitchen access panel, startling the line cooks who'd returned to their stations. Her hands were useless behind her back, but she knew exactly what she needed. Knife, she gasped to the sous chef, a guy named Miguel, who'd covered her shifts when her mother was dying. Now, Miguel grabbed a paring knife and cut through the zip tie without hesitation. Delia rubbed feeling back into her wrists, her mind racing. Leonard was still in the VIP room. Vincent had 4 armed men. The Bratva representative was arriving any second. She needed a weapon. Something better than a kitchen knife. Her eyes landed on the espresso machine, the commercial-grade beast that could generate steam pressure hot enough to strip skin. Beside it, the heavy porter-filter wrench, solid steel, 2 pounds of blunt force trauma waiting to happen. The kitchen door burst open. Volkov, gun raised, scanning for her. Delia grabbed the porter-filter from the espresso machine and twisted the steam release valve fully open. Superheated vapor exploded across the kitchen like a dragon's breath. Volkov screamed, dropping his weapon, his hands going to his face. She didn't give him time to recover. The porter-filter wrench caught him across the temple with a wet crunch, and he went down hard, unconscious before he hit the tile. Delia picked up his gun, checked the chamber like Victor had taught her, and moved back toward the VIP room. The service passages worked both ways. She knew exactly which panel opened directly behind where Vincent had been standing. She could hear voices through the wall, Vincent talking to someone new, probably the Bratva representative, Leonard's voice, defiant even with a knife at his throat. Delia positioned herself at the panel, took a breath, and kicked it open. Vincent spun around, shock registering on his face as Delia stepped through with the gun raised and steady. Drop the knife, she said, or I drop you. The room froze. Leonard's eyes met hers, and something like pride flickered across his face. Vincent looked between the gun and the woman holding it, calculating odds that had suddenly shifted out of his favor. You don't have the guts, Vincent said. Delia pulled the trigger. The bullet took Vincent in the shoulder, spinning him away from Leonard. He collapsed against the wall, cursing, the knife clattering to the floor. I was a waitress here for 2 years, Delia said, her voice cold as winter. I know every exit, every passage, every secret this building keeps. You never had a chance. Sirens wailed in the distance. Leonard's people, or maybe the actual police for once. It didn't matter. Vincent Corso's empire had just ended where it began in the Velvet Room, at the hands of someone he'd underestimated. The federal prosecutors came 3 days after Vincent's arrest, when the city was still buzzing with rumors about what had happened at the Velvet Room. They met in a downtown office building, all fluorescent lighting and government-issue furniture, where men in cheap suits held Leonard Sandberg's entire future in manila folders. Delia sat beside him, not because she had to, but because he'd asked her to. The fake engagement had ended the moment Vincent was loaded into an ambulance under police guard. The $150,000 was hers to keep. The debt to Tommy Russo erased like it had never existed. She could have walked away, gone back to her apartment, back to Marcus, back to rebuilding the life she'd put on hold. But she'd stayed. "Let me be clear about what we're offering," the lead prosecutor said, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many deals with devils. "Full immunity for your testimony against Vincent Corso and the Bratva operation. We want names, dates, transactions, everything. In exchange, we won't prosecute you for any crimes committed prior to this agreement." "And my organization?" Leonard asked. "Dismantled. You liquidate all criminal assets within 6 months. Your legitimate holdings, real estate, investments, the shipping company, those you keep. But the gambling, the protection rackets, the smuggling operations, all of it ends." Leonard leaned back in his chair, and Delia watched him processing the terms. He'd spent his entire life building an empire his father had started, brick by bloody brick. Now they were asking him to burn it all down. "What happens to my people? The ones who worked for me?" The prosecutor shuffled papers. "The ones who testify get consideration. The ones who don't, we prosecute to the fullest extent. That's not negotiable." "Then neither is this." Leonard pulled out a folder he'd brought with him, sliding it across the table. "I want protection for every member of my organization who cooperates. No jail time for anyone who provides information. You want to dismantle the Bratva's American operations? I'm handing you the keys, but I don't leave my people behind." The prosecutors exchanged glances. The lead woman opened the folder, scanning the contents, and Delia saw her eyebrows rise incrementally. "This is everything you need to destroy the Bratva's infrastructure on the East Coast. Shipping routes, financial networks, corrupt officials, all of it." Leonard's voice was calm, measured. "My father built something that lasted decades because he understood loyalty. I'm not betraying that legacy by abandoning the people who served us." The negotiations took 6 hours. By the end, Leonard had immunity, protection for 17 of his former associates who agreed to cooperate, and a timeline that would transform him from crime boss to legitimate businessman within a year. When they finally left the federal building, the sun was setting over the city, painting everything in shades of amber and blood orange. Leonard stood on the steps, looking at the skyline like he was seeing it for the first time. "I should feel something," he said. "Relief, maybe, or regret. But I just feel tired." "You feel human," Delia said. "That's new for you." He laughed, short and surprised. "When do you start?" "Nursing school? 3 weeks. I got the acceptance letter yesterday." She'd applied with the money Leonard had paid her, using recommendations from the program director at the hospital where her mother had died. The woman remembered Delia sitting vigil for weeks, learning medical terminology by osmosis, asking questions that showed she cared about understanding rather than just enduring. "You're going to be good at it, taking care of people. I've had practice." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the expensive suit and the dangerous reputation to the man who'd lost his father, betrayed by someone he loved, forced to destroy everything he'd built to survive. "What will you do? With legitimate businesses and no criminal empire to run?" Leonard was quiet for a moment, watching traffic pass below. "I have no idea. For the first time in my life, I actually get to choose. That's terrifying." "Completely." He turned to face her, and something vulnerable flickered in those gray eyes she'd once thought were empty. "The fake engagement is over. The debt is paid. You don't owe me anything, Delia." "I know. So why are you still here?" It was a fair question. She'd asked herself the same thing 100 times over the past 3 days. The practical answer was that she'd grown accustomed to the safety, the resources, the absence of fear that had defined her life for years. But the real answer was more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. "Because somewhere between you yelling at me over bourbon and me shooting Vincent Corso," she said slowly, "this stopped being fake for me, and I think it stopped being fake for you too." Leonard stepped closer, his hand finding hers. "If we do this, if we try the real version, it won't be easy. I have enemies still. The Bratva won't forgive what we did. There will be threats, complications. I spent 2 years dodging loan sharks and keeping my brother alive on $23. I think I can handle complicated. And if I asked you to stay? Not as part of a deal or an arrangement, just as As partners, Delia finished. Real ones. The word hung between them, weighted with everything they'd survived and everything they'd lost, and everything they might still build from the ashes of his old empire. Leonard smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, it reached his eyes. Partners. Delia squeezed his hand. I have one condition. Name it. You never yell at another waitress as long as you live. He laughed, genuine and surprised. Deal. They walked down the steps together, leaving the federal building behind, heading toward a future neither of them had planned, but both of them had somehow earned. 3 months later, Delia started her first semester of nursing school. Leonard sold his last illegal asset and pivoted his shipping company toward humanitarian logistics. Marcus got accepted to engineering programs at 3 universities with full scholarships. And every Tuesday night, they had dinner together at a small restaurant in Riverside, not the Velvet Room, which had been shut down as part of the Bratva investigation where nobody knew who Leonard Sandberg used to be, and Delia Pickett was just a nursing student with calloused hands and a smile that had finally learned how to be real. The lesson was simple, written in blood and bourbon and second chances. Sometimes the person who refuses to bow is the only one strong enough to stand beside you when everything falls apart. And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is choose to be seen as human in a world that demands you be a monster. Power doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing when to walk away from the empire and build something worth keeping instead.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.